The underestimation. The grand chamber of the Galactic Council stretched across 3 kilometers of polished crystal, its walls reaching toward a dome that displayed the swirling colors of nearby nebula. Representatives from 47 different species sat in their designated sections, their forms as varied as the stars themselves. Some floated in liquid-filled containers, others perched on crystalline branches, and many more stood on platforms designed for their unique physiologies. Ambassador Elena Vasquez felt small in this vast space, though she refused to let it show. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple bun, and she wore the deep blue uniform of the United Earth Diplomatic Corps. At just over 5.5 feet tall, she was indeed tiny compared to most of the beings around her, but her brown eyes held a steady determination that had served humanity well in these first crucial months of galactic contact. The session had been called to discuss humanity's application for basic trading rights within the Galactic Commerce Zone. It should have been a routine matter, but Elena could sense the undercurrent of dismissal flowing through the chamber like a cold wind. High Counselor Meridax, a being that resembled a walking tree with golden bark and leaves that chimed like bells when he moved, called the session to order. His voice resonated through the universal translators mounted throughout the chamber. We convene today to consider the petition of the species that calls itself humanity. The pause before her species' name was slight but noticeable. Their representative, Ambassador Vasquez, has requested standard trading privileges and protection under galactic law. Elena stood, her movement causing several alien eyes to focus on her with what she could only interpret as amusement. She activated her translator and began to speak. Honored counselors, I come before you representing not just Earth, but the collective hope of 4 billion human beings who dream of joining the galactic community. We offer our friendship, our knowledge, and our commitment to peaceful cooperation. A sound that might have been laughter rippled through several sections of the chamber. Elena's jaw tightened slightly, but she continued. Humanity has much to contribute. Our scientific achievements, our cultural diversity, our adaptability. Adaptability? The voice boomed across the chamber, causing Elena to pause. Commander Thaxos of the Zephyrian Empire rose from his section, his 8-foot frame covered in scales that shifted from deep purple to silver. His 4 arms gestured dismissively as he spoke. What adaptability can there be in such a fragile species? Thaxos's personal aide, a smaller Zephyrian with bright orange scales, whispered something that caused the commander to emit what Elena recognized as their version of laughter. The sound was like grinding metal. Honored Commander, Elena replied, keeping her voice level. I believe our achievements speak for themselves. We've achieved faster-than-light travel, established colonies on 12 worlds, and developed technologies that… Technologies? Thaxos interrupted, his scales now flashing bright yellow with what Elena had learned indicated scorn. Your ships are held together with welded metal. Your weapons fire simple projectiles. Your people cannot even survive in different atmospheric conditions without bulky protective gear. Murmurs of agreement rose from several other sections. Elena noticed the reptilian Seskoth delegation nodding their elongated heads, while the crystalline Vorthok emitted harmonious tones that their translator interpreted as amusement. Counselor Zeph-Hai, whose gaseous form swirled within a containment field, spoke next. The Zephyrian commander raises valid concerns. How can we extend protections to a species that appears so limited in its capabilities? Elena felt her heart rate increase, but she forced herself to remain calm. This was exactly what the Earth Council had prepared her for. Respectfully, Counselor, I would argue that our limitations have actually been our greatest strength. We've learned to survive and thrive on a world that many of you would consider uninhabitable. Our diversity of thought and approach has led to innovations that… Innovations? Thaxos laughed again, the sound echoing through the chamber. Your entire military consists of beings who require sleep, food, and water daily. Your soldiers can be incapacitated by something as simple as atmospheric pressure changes. You call this innovation? Elena's hands clenched slightly at her sides. Commander, with respect, strength isn't always measured in raw power or biological advantages. Sometimes it's measured in what? Thaxos spread his 4 arms wide. In the ability to die easily? Your species has an average lifespan shorter than most of our military campaigns. Your bodies are soft, your reflexes slow, your endurance pathetic by… Galactic standards. The chamber filled with what Elena could only describe as alien laughter. Even some of the more diplomatic species seemed amused by Thaxos's assessment. Only the Karani delegation, peaceful traders who had been among the first to make contact with humanity, remained silent. High Counselor Meridax raised one of his branch-like arms for silence. While Commander Thaxos's language is perhaps unnecessarily harsh, his concerns about humanity's physical limitations are shared by many in this chamber. Ambassador Vasquez, how do you respond to these observations? Elena took a deep breath. She had known this moment would come. The preliminary reports from First Contact had made it clear that humanity was viewed as weak by galactic standards. Most species had evolved on worlds with lower gravity, different atmospheric compositions, or had developed natural abilities that far surpassed human capabilities. Honored counselors, she began, I won't deny that humans face physical limitations compared to many of your species. But I would submit that survival isn't just about individual strength. It's about ingenuity, cooperation, and the ability to adapt to changing circumstances. Adapt? Thaxos's scales flashed brighter. Your species took nearly 10,000 years to develop spaceflight. The Zephyrians achieved it in less than 4,000. The Vorthak managed it in fewer than 2,000. You are not just weak, Ambassador Vasquez, you are slow. Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach, but it wasn't fear. It was recognition. She was seeing something in Thaxos's expression, in the way his scales had shifted to bright orange, in the dismissive gestures of his aide. She had seen this look before in the history books of Earth, in the faces of those who had underestimated humanity throughout their long and difficult climb to the stars. Commander, she said quietly, may I ask about the Zephyrian assessment of human colony defenses? Thaxos seemed surprised by the question. His scales shifted to a more neutral purple. Your colonies? They are barely defended. A handful of ships, some orbital platforms with primitive weapons. Why do you ask? Elena nodded slowly. And you believe these defenses would be inadequate against a determined assault? Now Thaxos looked genuinely puzzled. Ambassador, are you asking me to evaluate your military capabilities? Because if so, I must tell you that they are laughably weak. A single Zephyrian battle group could overwhelm any 3 of your colonies without significant effort. I see. Elena's voice had grown very quiet, and something in her tone seemed to catch the attention of several nearby delegations. And you base this assessment on your observation of our technology and physical capabilities? Of course. Thaxos's confidence was absolute. Your weapons are primitive, your ships slow, your soldiers fragile. What else would I base it on? Elena looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes or optical sensors of as many representatives as she could. When she spoke, her voice carried clearly through the vast space. Commander Thaxos, members of the Council, I want to thank you for this conversation. It has been illuminating. I believe I understand now how humanity is perceived by the galactic community. She paused, and something in her stillness seemed to command attention. I will be returning to Earth to deliver your assessment to the Human Colonial Authority. I'm sure they will find your evaluation of our capabilities to be very educational. High Counselor Meridax's leaves rustled with what might have been concern. Ambassador, you speak as if this conversation has ended badly. That was not our intention. Your application for trading rights will still be considered. Oh, I'm not concerned about trading rights, Elena replied, and now there was something in her smile that several of the more experienced diplomats found unsettling. I'm simply grateful for the clarity. It's always helpful to know exactly where one stands. Commander Thaxos leaned forward in his section. Ambassador, if you're suggesting that humanity poses some sort of threat. Threat? Elena's eyebrows rose. Commander, you've just finished explaining to this entire assembly that humanity is weak, slow, and poorly defended. How could we possibly pose a threat? The silence that followed stretched for several long moments. Elena gathered her materials calmly, as if this had been nothing more than a pleasant social call. I will be departing for Earth tomorrow, she announced. Thank you all for your time and your frank assessments. I believe this information will be very useful to my people. As she walked toward the exit, Elena could hear whispered conversations starting behind her. The Karani delegate called out, Ambassador, perhaps we might speak privately before you depart? Elena paused and turned back. Of course, Ambassador Katesh, I'm always happy to speak with friends of humanity. The emphasis on the word friends was slight but noticeable. So was the way she didn't look back at Commander Thaxos as she left the chamber. 3 days later, intelligence reports began reaching the Galactic Council about unusual activity in human space. Merchant vessels reported seeing construction projects at human colonies, but the nature of these projects was unclear. More concerning were reports of human ships moving in unusual patterns, as if conducting some sort of coordinated exercises. Commander Thaxos dismissed these reports when they reached his command ship, the Dominion's Edge. Probably emergency drills, he told his aide. Weak species often panic when they realize how exposed they are. His aide, Subcommander Vexahai, seemed less certain. Sir, the patterns seem highly organized, almost as if they're preparing for... For what? Thaxos laughed. We evaluated their capabilities ourselves. They have nothing that could threaten even a single Zephyrian vessel. But privately, something about Ambassador Vasquez's final words nagged at him. There had been something in her tone, something in the way she had thanked them for their clarity. It reminded him of stories from the old conquest campaigns, of prey species that had seemed submissive right up until the moment they had revealed hidden fangs. Thaxos shook his head, dismissing the thought. The human colonies were rich in resources that the Zephyrian Empire needed. Their weakness made them perfect targets for expansion. The Galactic Council would protest, of course, but they always did. And once the humans were integrated into the Empire as a subject species, everyone would see the wisdom of Zephyrian leadership. He activated his communication system and sent word to the Imperial Command, request permission to begin annexation of human colonial territories. Opposition expected to be minimal. The response came within hours. Permission granted. Begin operations immediately. As the Zephyrian Third Fleet began its approach toward the nearest human colony, Thaxos felt a familiar thrill of anticipation. Another weak species would learn the price of existing in a galaxy dominated by the strong. He had no way of knowing that every communication in and out of Zephyrian space had been monitored by what appeared to be routine merchant traffic. He had no way of knowing that the construction projects at human colonies were actually the most sophisticated defensive networks ever conceived by human military engineers. And he had no way of knowing that Ambassador Elena Vasquez's final words had been a carefully coded message that had triggered something the galactic community had never seen before. Humanity fully united and focused on a single purpose. As the Zephyrian fleet crossed into human space, Thaxos was about to discover that there was a significant difference between being weak and appearing weak. Humanity was about to teach the galaxy a lesson that had been learned by Earth's predators millions of years earlier. Never underestimate the prey that doesn't run. The war was about to begin, and neither side would emerge unchanged. The awakening. The first indication that something was wrong came when the Zephyrian Third Fleet's long-range sensors failed to detect any human ships fleeing from New Geneva Colony. Commander Thaxos stood on the bridge of the Dominion's Edge, his scales shifting from confident purple to puzzled orange as he stared at the tactical display. Sub-Commander Vexahai, he called to his aide, confirm sensor readings. The human colony should be in full evacuation by now. Vexahai's smaller frame hunched over the sensor station, his orange scales flickering with concentration. Sir, I'm reading normal civilian traffic patterns, no signs of evacuation. In fact, he paused, his scales shifting to uncertain yellow. Sir, I'm detecting what appears to be increased activity around their orbital platforms. Thaxos moved to the display, his forearms working the controls with practiced efficiency. The image of New Geneva Colony expanded before them, a modest settlement on a terrestrial world with 3 moons. The colony housed approximately 50,000 humans and served as a mining operation for rare earth elements that the Zephyrian Empire desperately needed. Increased activity? Thaxos studied the readings. Explain. The platforms appear to be... Vexahai hesitated. Sir, it looks like they're powering up systems we didn't know they had. Before Thaxos could respond, his communications officer, a veteran named Kreshtar, spoke up. Commander, we're receiving a transmission from the colony. Put it through. Thaxos straightened to his full 8-foot height, preparing to receive the colony's surrender. The face that appeared on the main screen was human, male, with graying hair and calm brown eyes. He wore a simple work shirt rather than any kind of uniform, and there was something in his expression that immediately set Thaxos on edge. I'm Director Marcus Chen of New Geneva Colony, the human said, his voice carrying easily through the universal translator. I understand you have some business with us. Thaxos felt his scales shift to aggressive bright yellow. Director Chen, I am Commander Thaxos of the Zephyrian Imperial Fleet. You will order the immediate evacuation of all human personnel from this system. This colony is now property of the Zephyrian Empire. Chen nodded slowly, as if considering the statement. I see, and if we refuse? Then you will be removed by force. Thaxos gestured to his tactical officer. I have 12 heavy cruisers and 40 escort vessels. Your defenses consist of 3 orbital platforms with primitive weapons. I suggest you make the wise choice. Something that might have been a smile flickered across Chen's face. Commander, before you make any irreversible decisions, might I suggest you take another look at those sensor readings? Thaxos was about to dismiss the suggestion when Vexhi's urgent voice cut through the bridge chatter. Sir, new contacts! Multiple new contacts! The tactical display exploded with light as dozens of new signatures appeared around the colony. They seemed to materialize from nowhere, ships that had somehow avoided detection until this moment. Where did they come from? Thaxos demanded. Unknown, sir. They appear to have been hiding in the asteroid field, but our sensors showed nothing there. Thaxos studied the display with growing unease. The human ships were smaller than his vessels, but there were more of them than intelligence reports had suggested possible. More disturbing was their formation. They weren't clustered defensively around the colony, as he had expected. Instead, they had spread out in what looked like an encirclement pattern. Director Chen, Thaxos said, his voice harder now. You cannot seriously believe that your primitive vessels pose a threat to Imperial ships. Primitive? Chen's voice carried a note of what sounded like genuine curiosity. Commander, what exactly do your intelligence reports say about human technology? Despite himself, Thaxos found himself answering. Welded metal construction, kinetic weapons, chemical propulsion systems, nothing that could penetrate our shields or outmaneuver our ships. Chen nodded thoughtfully. I see. And you base this assessment on what you observed during first contact missions? Of course. Ah. Chen's expression grew almost sympathetic. Commander, may I share something with you? Something about human psychology that might not have made it into your intelligence reports? Thaxos' scales rippled with irritation, but something about the human's calm demeanor kept him listening. Humans, Commander, have a long history of showing visitors exactly what we want them to see. We found it to be useful in determining intentions. The words sent a chill through Thaxos' chest. What are you saying? I'm saying that every ship you observed during first contact, every weapon system you cataloged, every defensive installation you evaluated. Chen paused. Those were what we wanted you to see. Before Thaxos could respond, his sensors officer called out in alarm. Sir, the human orbital platforms, they're not platforms. On the display, what had appeared to be simple defensive platforms began to unfold. Armor plating retracted to reveal weapon systems unlike anything in the Zephyrian database. More disturbing still, the platforms began to move, revealing themselves to be ships of a design completely unknown to galactic science. What kind of weapons are those? Vexhi whispered. Chen's voice answered before Thaxos could ask the question. Plasma accelerators, magnetic rail systems, quantum torpedo launchers. Oh, and Commander, those aren't the only surprises. The asteroid field around the colony began to change. What had appeared to be lifeless rocks revealed themselves to be camouflaged installations. Hidden weapon emplacements powered up, their energy signatures blazing across Zephyrian sensors like tiny stars. Thaxos felt his confidence wavering for the first time in decades of military service. This is impossible. Our intelligence. Your intelligence observed exactly what we showed them, Chen interrupted gently. Commander, humanity learned a long time ago that the best defense is often to appear defenseless. We call it speaking softly and carrying a big stick. The human ships began to move, and Thaxos realized with growing alarm that their maneuvers were far more sophisticated than anything his intelligence reports had suggested possible. They moved like a school of fish, each vessel anticipating the movements of the others with uncanny precision. Sir, Kreshtar called out, we're receiving multiple targeting locks from the human vessels. Thaxos straightened, his military training overriding his confusion. All ships, raise shields and prepare for combat. Show these primitives the power of the Imperial fleet. But as his ships moved to attack formation, something extraordinary happened. The human vessels didn't attempt to meet them in traditional ship-to-ship combat. Instead, they scattered in all directions, moving in patterns that seemed random but somehow coordinated. "What are they doing?" Vex-High demanded. The answer came in the form of weapons fire unlike anything the Zephyrians had ever encountered. Instead of the simple kinetic projectiles their intelligence had prepared them for, the human ships unleashed beams of coherent energy that seemed to bend and curve through space, finding weak points in Zephyrian shields with surgical precision. "Shields at 60%, his tactical officer reported. "These weapons are far more advanced than our intelligence indicated." But the real shock came when Thaxos realized that the human ships weren't just attacking, they were communicating. Each vessel seemed to know exactly where the others were and what they were doing, creating a web of coordinated fire that his larger, more powerful ships couldn't effectively counter. "Sir, recommend we withdraw to a safer distance and reassess," Vex-High suggested, his scales now flashing urgent yellow. "Negative," Thaxos growled. "We have superior numbers and firepower. Focus fire on their command ship." But identifying the human command ship proved impossible. The vessels moved in such perfect coordination that there seemed to be no single command structure, or rather, every ship seemed to be both following and leading simultaneously. On the screen, Director Chen watched the battle with what appeared to be sad resignation. "Commander, I'm going to give you one opportunity to withdraw your forces and reconsider your position." "Never!" Thaxos's scales blazed bright red with rage. "The Zephyrian Empire does not retreat from inferior species." Chen sighed. "Very well. Captain Martinez, you're authorized to implement Protocol 7. Thaxos had no idea what Protocol 7 meant, but he was about to find out. The human ships suddenly stopped their seemingly random movements and formed into tight formations. What happened next challenged everything the Zephyrians thought they knew about space combat. The human vessels began to work in perfect synchronization, their weapons combining into focused beams that punched through Zephyrian shields like they weren't there. More startling still, some of the smaller human ships actually linked together, forming larger vessels with combined firepower and defensive capabilities. "They're modular," Vex-High exclaimed. "Their ships can combine and reconfigure." But the true revelation came when the humans revealed their most closely guarded secret. Several of their vessels opened bays that released what appeared to be small fighter craft, but these weren't piloted by humans. They moved within human precision and reaction times. "Drones," Thaxos breathed. "They're using artificial intelligence to pilot their fighters." The drone swarms moved like extensions of a single mind, weaving through the battlefield with impossible grace. They targeted specific systems on Zephyrian ships, weapons, engines, communication arrays, with pinpoint accuracy. Within minutes, half of Thaxos's fleet was disabled or destroyed. The remainder were trapped in a web of human vessels that seemed to anticipate their every move. "Sir, we're being hailed by the human command ship," Kreshtar reported. "Put them through," Thaxos said, his voice hollow with defeat. Director Chen's face appeared on screen again, but he was no longer alone. Behind him stood a woman in a dark blue uniform that Thaxos recognized with a shock of surprise. "Ambassador Vasquez?" he gasped. Elena Vasquez stepped forward, her expression stern but not unkind. "Commander Thaxos, I told you that humanity would find your assessment of our capabilities to be educational." "This is impossible," Thaxos protested. "Your technology, your weapons, none of this was in our intelligence reports." "No," Elena agreed. "It wasn't. Commander, what you observed during first contact were our diplomatic vessels. What you cataloged as our weapons were civilian mining equipment. What you evaluated as our defenses were training facilities." She paused. "You never actually saw our military technology." The full scope of the deception began to dawn on Thaxos. You deliberately showed us inferior equipment." "We showed you exactly what we thought you needed to see," Elena corrected. "Commander, humanity has been dealing with predatory species for millions of years. We learned long ago that survival sometimes requires letting your enemies underestimate you." Director Chen stepped forward. "Commander, your fleet is disabled, not destroyed. Your crews are alive. We're prepared to allow you to withdraw on one condition." "What condition?" Thaxos asked, though he suspected he already knew. Elena answered, "You will return to the Galactic Council and deliver a message. Humanity is not as weak as you assumed. We are not easy prey, and we are far more dangerous when threatened than you ever imagined." She leaned forward slightly. "We are also prepared to be the most loyal and valuable allies you could ever hope for." "The choice, Commander, is yours. As the remains of his fleet limped away from New Geneva colony, Commander Thaxos found himself reconsidering everything he thought he knew about humanity. The weak, primitive species he had dismissed so easily had just demonstrated military capabilities that exceeded anything in the Imperial database. But more disturbing than their technology was their strategy. They had allowed themselves to appear weak, had endured condescension and dismissal, all while preparing for this moment. It suggested a level of long-term planning and psychological sophistication that the galactic community had never encountered. As his ship jumped to hyperspace, Thaxos realized that the galaxy was about to change. Humanity had just announced their presence in a way that no one could ignore. The question now was whether they would use their revealed strength as conquerors or as protectors. Based on what he had just experienced, Thaxos suspected that the answer would determine the fate of every species in the galaxy: the recognition. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened within hours of Commander Thaxos's return to Zephyrian space. Representatives from across the galaxy had gathered, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony of clicks, whistles, harmonics, and translated speech that filled the great chamber. The air itself seemed to thrum with tension. High Counselor Meridax stood at the center of the assembly, his golden bark gleaming under the chamber's lights. His leaves rustled with what those familiar with his species recognized as deep concern. "Fellow representatives," he began, his voice cutting through the noise, "we are here to address reports of unprecedented events in human space. Commander Thaxos of the Zephyrian Empire has requested permission to address this assembly." Thaxos entered the chamber, and immediately those who had seen him at previous sessions noticed the change. His scales, once bright and confident, had shifted to muted grays and blues. His four arms, typically held in positions of authority, now hung with what could only be described as humility. As he approached the speaking platform, whispers filled the chamber. The proud Zephyrian commander looked like a being who had encountered something beyond his understanding. "Honored counselors," Thaxos began, his voice lacking its usual commanding tone, "I come before you to report on the Zephyrian Empire's recent interaction with human colonial forces." Counselor Zeph-High's gaseous form swirled with what his species displayed as curiosity. "Commander, your initial reports indicated that the annexation of human colonies would be accomplished with minimal resistance." "Yes," Thaxos replied quietly, "that was our assessment." "And," pressed Representative Clickstar of the Vorthak Confederation, his crystalline form chiming with impatience. Thaxos was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his words carried the weight of complete honesty. "We were wrong. Completely, catastrophically wrong." The chamber erupted in surprise sounds from dozens of different species. The Siskath delegation hissed in unison, while the energy beings of the Plasma Collective pulsed with rapid light patterns. "Explain," Meridax commanded. Thaxos activated a holographic projector, and the center of the chamber filled with images from the battle at New Geneva colony. The assembled representatives watched in stunned silence as human vessels revealed capabilities that defied everything in their intelligence databases. "These ships," Thaxos said, pointing to the modular human vessels, "can reconfigure themselves during combat. Their weapon systems are generations ahead of anything we cataloged during first contact. Their tactical coordination surpasses even our most advanced military formations." Representative Katesh of the Karani delegation spoke up, her melodious voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "Commander, are you suggesting that humanity deliberately misrepresented their capabilities during first contact?" "Not misrepresented," Thaxos corrected. "They simply didn't reveal them. Everything we observed was real, but it was civilian technology, training equipment, diplomatic vessels." His scales shifted to shame yellow. "We never actually encountered their military capabilities." The implications of this statement sent a wave of unease through the assembly. If humanity had concealed their true strength so effectively, what else might they be hiding? Counselor Vrath of the Silicon Syndicate, a being composed of living crystal and metal, spoke in harmonics that the translators rendered as deep concern. "Commander, what are humanity's intentions now? Are they moving to conquer former Zephyrian territories?" "No," Thaxos replied, and something in his voice suggested this answer surprised him. "They disabled our fleet but allowed us to withdraw. They made no territorial demands. Their only requirement was that I deliver a message to this council." "What message?" Meridax asked. Before Thaxos could answer, a new voice filled the chamber. Perhaps I should deliver it myself. Every head, optical sensor, and consciousness detector in the assembly turned toward the entrance. Ambassador Elena Vasquez walked calmly down the center aisle, her simple blue uniform a stark contrast to the elaborate forms and dress of the other representatives. But something had changed about her since her last appearance in this chamber. She moved with the same dignity, but there was a new quality to her presence, a quiet confidence that seemed to fill the vast space around her. Ambassador Vasquez, Meridac said, his leaves rustling with surprise, you were not scheduled to address this assembly. No, Elena agreed, taking her position at the speaking platform. But circumstances have changed, haven't they? She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes and optical sensors of the representatives. When she spoke, her voice carried to every corner of the vast space. 3 weeks ago, I stood in this chamber and listened to a detailed assessment of humanity's weaknesses. I was told that my species was fragile, primitive, and poorly defended. I was informed that we posed no threat to anyone and deserved no special consideration. Her voice remained calm, but something in her tone caused several representatives to shift uncomfortably. I want to thank you for that assessment. It was very useful. Thaxos's scales flickered with recognition and, perhaps, regret. Elena continued. You see, humanity has learned something during our long climb from our world to the stars. We've learned that the galaxy can be a dangerous place. We've learned that not everyone approaches new encounters with peaceful intentions. And we've learned that sometimes, survival depends on being underestimated. She activated her own holographic projector, and new images filled the chamber. These showed not the battle at New Geneva, but scenes from across human space, construction projects on dozens of worlds, ships moving in coordinated formations, installations that had been dismissed as mining operations revealing themselves to be sophisticated military bases. For the past 18 months, while we've been engaging in diplomatic relations with the galactic community, humanity has been preparing, not for conquest, but for survival. Representative Quindar of the Hive Collective, whose insectoid form twitched with agitation, spoke up. You have deceived us. How can we trust any species that practices such deception? Elena turned to face the Hive representative directly. With respect, Representative Quindar, we have never lied to you. When asked about our capabilities, we showed you exactly what we had developed at that time. We simply didn't mention what we were working on. A distinction without a difference, scoffed Councillor HFY. Is it? Elena asked. Representative Quindar, when the Galactic Council first made contact with the Hive Collective, did you immediately reveal the full extent of your reproductive capabilities? Did you explain that your species could establish a functional colony with a single queen and 3 worker drones? Quindar's chittering stopped abruptly. Elena continued. Councillor HFY, did your people immediately share the fact that your gaseous form can infiltrate and disable electronic systems when you first joined this council? The councillor's swirling form seemed to compress slightly. The truth is, Elena said, addressing the entire assembly, every species in this chamber has secrets. Every species has capabilities they don't advertise. The difference is that humanity's secrets were specifically designed to protect us from predatory species. She gestured toward Thaxos. The commander's fleet approached our colony with the stated intention of annexing it by force. They expected easy conquest of what they believed to be a defenseless settlement. Instead, they discovered that humanity is far from defenseless. Meridax's leaves rustled as he spoke. Ambassador, while your species' caution is understandable, this revelation has significant implications for galactic security. How are we to know the true extent of human military capabilities? Elena smiled, and there was something in that expression that several representatives found both reassuring and slightly unsettling. High Counselor, that's exactly the right question, and I'm prepared to answer it. She activated another hologram, and this one showed something that caused gasps and harmonics of amazement throughout the chamber. It was a star map, but unlike any they had seen before. It showed not just human colonies, but a vast network of hidden installations, sensor arrays, and defensive positions that extended far beyond known human space. This is the true extent of human presence in this region of the galaxy. These installations have been monitoring all interstellar traffic, all communications, all military movements for the past 2 years. The implications hit the assembly like a wave. Humanity hadn't just been hiding their strength, they had been actively gathering intelligence on every major species in the region. However, Elena continued, I want to be clear about humanity's intentions. We built these networks not for conquest, but for protection. We have no desire to dominate other species or expand through military force." She paused, letting her words sink in. "What we do desire is to be treated as equals. Notice weak primitives to be conquered or dismissed, but as partners in building a peaceful and prosperous galactic community." The chamber fell silent as the full scope of humanity's revelation sank in. They had been operating under completely false assumptions about one of the galaxy's newest species. Representative Katesh of the Karani delegation was the first to speak. "Ambassador Vasquez, if humanity possesses such advanced capabilities, why reveal them now? Why not continue to operate from the shadows?" Elena's expression grew thoughtful. "Because deception was never our goal, Representative Katesh. It was simply a survival strategy until we could determine the true nature of galactic politics. The attack on New Geneva forced us to reveal our hand earlier than planned." She looked directly at Thaxos. "Commander, I want you to know that humanity takes no pleasure in the casualties your fleet suffered. We regret that violence was necessary." Thaxos' scales shifted to a color that human observers might have interpreted as embarrassment. "Ambassador, my fleet attacked your colony unprovoked. You had every right to defend yourselves. I apologize for underestimating your people." The apology from a Zephyrian commander sent another wave of surprise through the assembly. The Zephyrian Empire was known for its pride and reluctance to admit error. Elena nodded graciously. "Apology accepted, Commander. But I think this incident has taught us all something important about assumptions and first impressions." Counselor Vrath's crystalline form chimed with what the translators interpreted as curiosity. "Ambassador, what does humanity propose we do with this new information?" "I propose," Elena said, "that we move forward with honesty and mutual respect. Humanity is prepared to share our technological advances with peaceful species. We're ready to contribute to galactic defense initiatives, and we're willing to open our space for legitimate scientific and commercial activities." She paused, and her voice took on a more serious tone. "However, any species that approaches human space with hostile intent will discover that we are far from the easy targets we once appeared to be. The galaxy is vast enough for all of us to prosper, but only if we choose cooperation over conquest." High Counselor Meridax raised one of his branch-like arms. "Ambassador, on behalf of the Galactic Council, I want to formally apologize for our previous dismissive assessment of humanity's capabilities and contributions." "Thank you, High Counselor, but I think the real question now is, where do we go from here?" Representative Quindar's chittering resumed at a more thoughtful frequency. Perhaps we could establish formal defense cooperation agreements. If humanity is willing to share defensive technologies, we are," Elena confirmed. "But such sharing must be mutual. We're particularly interested in your species' rapid communication networks and bioengineering capabilities." What followed was the beginning of the most productive diplomatic session in the Council's recent history. Species after species stepped forward to propose cooperation agreements, technology exchanges, and mutual defense pacts. The revelation of humanity's true capabilities had paradoxically made them more trustworthy, not less. Their restraint in using their power had impressed even the most cautious species. As the session continued, Elena found herself thinking about the journey that had brought them to this moment. Humanity's path to the stars had been long and difficult, marked by countless struggles and near extinctions. Those struggles had taught them valuable lessons about survival, adaptation, and the importance of unity in the face of external threats. But perhaps most importantly, their difficult history had taught them that strength without wisdom was meaningless, and that true power came not from the ability to dominate others, but from the wisdom to know when to reveal your capabilities and when to keep them hidden. 3 months later, the first joint human-alien research station was established in the Karani system. Within a year, human defensive technologies had been integrated into the Galactic Council's peacekeeping forces. And within 5 years, humanity had become one of the most respected and influential species in galactic politics. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, and it hadn't been without challenges. Some species remained suspicious of humanity's hidden capabilities. Others worried about the precedent of concealing military strength during diplomatic negotiations. But as time passed, most came to appreciate what humanity had truly demonstrated, that strength and wisdom could coexist, that a species could be both powerful and peaceful, and that sometimes the greatest victory was knowing when not to fight. Commander Thaxos, who had become an unlikely advocate for human-Zephyrian cooperation, often reflected on the lessons learned from that first encounter. His empire had approached humanity expecting easy conquest and had instead discovered a species that challenged everything they thought they knew about power and diplomacy. In his final report to the Zephyrian High Command, he wrote, "We assumed humans were weak because they appeared vulnerable. We assumed they were primitive because their initial technology seemed simple. We assumed they would be easy to conquer because they spoke of peace rather than war. In every assumption, we were wrong." Humanity has taught us that true strength is not always visible, that wisdom often lies in restraint, and that the most dangerous opponents are those who choose their battles carefully. They have shown us that a species can be both formidable in war and dedicated to peace. The galaxy is a different place now that we know humanity's true nature. It is, I believe, a better place. As the years passed and humanity's role in galactic affairs continued to expand, Ambassador Elena Vasquez often returned to that first difficult session of the Galactic Council. The memory of standing before dozens of species who dismissed her people as weak and primitive served as a reminder of how far they had come. But more than that, it reminded her of the importance of patience, preparation, and the power of being underestimated. Humanity had survived countless challenges throughout their history not because they were the strongest or the fastest or the most technologically advanced, but because they had learned to adapt, to endure, and to reveal their true strength only when absolutely necessary. The galaxy had learned an important lesson about humanity that day. But perhaps more importantly, humanity had learned something about themselves. That their greatest strength had never been their technology or their weapons or their individual capabilities. Their greatest strength was their unity, their adaptability, and their refusal to give up in the face of overwhelming odds. These were the qualities that had carried them from a single world to the stars, and these were the qualities that would guide them as they took their place among the greatest civilizations in the galaxy. The species that had once been dismissed as weak and primitive had proven that strength comes in many forms, and that the most powerful force in the universe is not the ability to destroy, but the wisdom to know when to fight and when to show mercy. Humanity had found their place among the stars not as conquerors, but as protectors, not as the strongest species in the galaxy, but as the species that understood that true strength meant using power responsibly. And in that understanding they had gained something more valuable than any military victory, the respect and trust of their fellow species, and the opportunity to help build a galaxy where strength and wisdom could coexist in harmony. The lesson was clear. Never underestimate the species that chooses to appear weak. Sometimes the greatest power lies not in displaying your strength, but in knowing when to reveal it. In the end, humanity had been underestimated, and they had proven that being underestimated was sometimes the greatest advantage of all. The end.